Humans are stupid. At least, that's what the rest of the universe says. If you've ever seen one, you may agree. Put simply, they do things no one else would ever think of. A human would call this creative thinking, but others see it as a lack of survival instinct. For instance, one human is recorded as getting the bright idea to shove an experimental hazardous chemical into a ship's thrusters because he thought it would make them go faster. It blew up, as anyone else could have guessed. His last words were, "What if it works?" That's the type of creature you're dealing with when you look at humans, but some find there is far more to them than you can gather through mere tales. A warrior race known as the Quell'en learned this the hard way. They are a cold-blooded people covered in scales, rarely seen without their harsh thermal-regulating armors. A human might call them reptilian, which wouldn't be an unfair comparison. Their temperaments are as steely as their gaze. Their might is surpassed only by their cunning. Even their size is as if a river monster stood on two legs, regularly surpassing the average human by several feet. To the dismay of many species, they value nothing more than a good fight, searching the galaxy for worthy adversaries. Their only saving grace is that they find advanced weaponry a distasteful handicap, relying instead on staff and blade, no matter their opponent. The best way to deal with the scourge of a Quell'en fleet is to shoot them down before they even get close, or challenge their leader to individual combat. Despite their fearsome nature, they always respect their traditions. There has been only one recorded case of a Quell'en denying such a challenge. Two ships met in the middle of a battlefield for negotiations. Facing the scaled terrors was a clever species known as the Mazral. Those present would be more familiar with a hydraulic wrench than a blade, but they are a people rarely caught unprepared. They first pleaded for mercy, acting pitifully to lower their foe's guard. Just as it looked like the meeting would result in bloodshed, the Mazral demanded the right. The Quell'en leader sneered and shook his head. He thought them beneath the honor and refused them. There was a brief tense moment as his honor guard turned their gazes towards him. The next moment, the Mazral delegation watched in horror as his retinue set upon him. The lizard's head rolled at their feet, and the Quell'en left without another word. Knowing all this, one may wonder how humankind reacted to their first encounter with the Quell'en. Unlike the Mazral, the humans were unprepared. They had no fleet and no knowledge of their opponent. The populace of a small agricultural colony on a newly discovered Goldilocks planet could only watch with grim resolve as landing craft after landing craft set down in the forests outside their walls. A military presence was attached to the colony, but their defenses were for wildlife, not invasion. It was a massacre. The civilians could not evacuate due to the Quell'en's blockade, so instead decided to hide away in an emergency bunker. A small security detail was all that was left mere minutes after the reptilian warriors breached the walls. Sergeant J. Morris never considered himself much of a fighter. He barely considered himself a soldier. Put bluntly, Morris was a slacker. He had coasted through his enlistment along the path of least resistance for 8 years, only advancing in rank when his superior officer ordered him. Yet he and 5 rookies who had never seen combat were all that stood between 30 bloodthirsty lizards and hundreds of innocents. He looked at his men one last time, took a deep breath, and shouted at the top of his lungs. He tackled the nearest warrior with the force of 10 men and ripped the power sword out of his hands. His subordinates called out to him, but could only helplessly rain fire upon the enemy as the Quell'en swarmed his location. Bullets bounced off the lizard's armor like rubber pellets. Only shots to the more flexible portions were effective, but none present was skilled enough to hit them. They say that a dying man's last thoughts are of the best moments in his life. Morris had none to speak of. There were no loved ones to mourn him, and few friends who would even notice him gone. He did not fight for them, nor did he fight for his world. He did not even fight because he thought he could win. Every one of them knew they had no hope of survival. Humans are stupid. Even when there is no way out, when there is zero conceivable chance of victory, they still fight. Another species might try to open a dialogue. Another would surrender. Others would not even be in this situation in the first place due to better knowledge or equipment. Morris and his men fought because it was the only thing they could think of. More accurately, Morris was not thinking at all. His body moved in ways he did not even know it could. Before they even realized they were dead, 2 more fell at his feet. The Quell'en had grown overconfident. Their ease had made them lax. Not anymore. A small circle of bodies quickly formed around the sergeant. His opponents stared him down hungrily, licking their lips at the thought of a decent conquest. Morris did not have attention to spare. He swung his confiscated blade until his arm went numb. Another faced him, and another fell. The Quell'en surrounded him menacingly, pounding their fists against their armor in a rhythmic drumming. The rite of single combat had begun. It did not take long for Morris to tire. His audience stamped their feet restlessly, anticipating his fall, but he did not. After his 6th kill, he stabbed his sword into the ground and hunched over it, breathing heavily. A scaled warrior, easily a head taller than the rest, pushed his way to the front. He held a glaive taller than himself in one hand. The warrior leveled it at Morris and spoke in an unfamiliar tongue. It was a deep grating sound. His throat clattered, as if he had swallowed a rattlesnake. Morris finally looked around, and he did not like what he saw. His men watched helplessly from beyond the circle, knowing they could do nothing. He met their eyes, and they gazed at him tearfully. Suddenly, one saluted, slamming his fist against his breastplate. His eyes hardened despite his fear. The rest looked over numbly before repeating the motion. The brief clatter didn't reach the sergeant's ears over the death knell of the Quell'en, but he still felt it. With the eyes of his men upon him, Morris gathered his strength and picked up the blade. Only seconds later, it crashed into the dirt, alongside the arm that once held it. The sergeant had long expended his energy, and his luck had reached its limit. He collapsed to the roars of dozens. His opponent stepped over him, treating Morris like a bump in the road. The creature's eyes turned towards the rest of the detail, who were frantically attempting to affix bayonets to their rifles. As he tried to take another step, a weight slowed him down. Humans are stupid. One once spent 10 years building a spacecraft out of nothing but salvaged scrap, just because someone told him he couldn't. Another hitchhiked dozens of light years to a backwater planet because a man who lived there had insulted him. They are stubborn, spiteful creatures, and that makes them brilliant. Morris was human through and through. Even as he choked on dirt, his remaining hand clamped around the alien's foot. Even as the blood drained from his body, his grip tightened. Morris was a man who always took the easy way out. He was a man who always believed that he didn't have to work hard to be successful. Just as fire tempers steel, strife tempers people. It wasn't about getting by or being successful anymore. If he was going to die, he was at least going to take the big bastard with him. With another roar, he pulled himself to his feet. The Quell'en tilted his head and kicked at him. Morris faltered but didn't fall. He released his grip on the creature, only to throw a left hook at its face. A resounding crack reached his ears, but nothing more. Morris grimaced. The sound had come from him. He had punched the warrior with enough force to break his own fingers, and he hadn't even flinched. It made a noise that sounded like laughter, and reached for him, but Morris was already moving. He drove a knee into the alien's stomach. The Quell'en stopped it effortlessly, and wrapped its arms around his leg, but the sergeant didn't need his leg for what came next. As the Quell'en crushed his thigh, Morris wrestled a knife from his boot. It was an unremarkable standard-issue combat knife. His fingers screamed where they had fractured, but he gripped it tightly. Morris headbutted the warrior. It leaned back just enough to avoid the attack. The lizard chuckled as he stared the sergeant down. Morris met his eyes and smiled back. Then he embedded the knife into the creature's exposed neck, just above the gorget. The world went silent as the Quell'en let him go. With nothing holding him up, Morris collapsed again. The life drained from his eyes with the smile still on his face. The Quell'en fell soon after. The death knell stopped. The rite had finished. The human had won. The Quell'en began to move, gathering their dead. The security detail watched wordlessly as the aliens stacked the bodies atop each other. One of the warriors retrieved the dagger, and placed it atop the sergeant's chest. Another cut into the leader's hand, gathering his blood into a small receptacle. The last dragged the leader onto the pile. They moved with a practiced and solemn efficiency. The leader's glaive was coated in oil and lit ablaze before being thrust into the mound. As the pyre burned, the warrior with the blood vial approached the sergeant. Once he finished drawing a symbol in blood, all of them simply walked away. Minutes later, their ship soared into the sky, returning to their fleet. Those present were unaware, but one more studied would know that anointing the fallen with the blood of their quarry is one of the greatest honors a Quell'en can bestow, one rarely awarded to an outsider. To this day, the colony stands in his name. So, the next time you think of calling someone stupid, remember that it is those who spit in the face of common sense that achieve what others consider impossible.